Hello, everyone, and this is going to be a lecture or a summary lecture on modern novelists based on the CBCS prescribed syllabus for the University of Calcutta. And I have chosen to deliver this lecture today because it is the birthday of James Joyce, who is one of the novelists in our syllabus. So, without further ado, let me quickly share my screen and let's begin. Yeah, we are sharing, and I'm extremely sorry because of the internet lagging. So, quickly, let's begin. So, we are going to talk about three novelists today: Joseph Conrad, Virginia Woolf, and James Joyce. And we have two issues: one is the multivocal or polyvocal novels, and the other is stream of consciousness. We will come to them in due course of our discussion of them. But right now, let's focus on the novelists, and as we come to an understanding of the novels, we will understand what we mean by this. So, our first novelist of the day is Joseph Conrad. Now, Joseph Conrad's dates are 1857 to 1924, and he was the son of a Polish patriot. He was born in Ukraine, and later he joined the British Merchant Navy. I'm not a big fan of biographical details, but I tend to tell you from time to time the things you will absolutely necessarily need. And being in the British Merchant Navy, he spent his entire life voyaging around the world. And all his experiences as a voyager throughout the world bore fruit in his novels and in his short stories. So, in 1896, his voyages in the region of Malaya, what we know as Malaysia right now, this bore fruit in a novel called Alameer's Folly, as well as in An Outcast of the Islands. Now, An Outcast of the Islands is not a proper novel, it is a longish short story or a novella, sort of. And here he vividly paints the tropical backdrop. Now, one of his most notable uh, writing, one of his most notable novels, came out in the year 1900. The name of the novel is Lord Jim, and there is a subtitle called A Tale. And here the central character's name is Marlowe. The narrator is Marlowe, and Marlowe basically reappears in one of his other great novels, which was a part of uh, a collection. The name of the original novel is Heart of Darkness, Now, Lord Jim features uh, a tale which concerns India as well, and a ship called Patna, and the life of the captain of this ship, Patna. But Heart of Darkness is basically based on his experiences with Africa. And Heart of Darkness came out in the year 1902 in a collection called Youth, a Narrative and Two Other Stories. So it came out in a collection called Youth, a Narrative and Two Other Stories. So as you can understand, the collection came out in 1902, so I am not reiterating the fact. But you see, Heart of Darkness is a very significant book, and I always ask students to read this. You will have this in your semester 5 if you are studying under CU. So you will have this in your semester 5, and this is a brilliant tale which concerns Africa. In 1902, Africa was a continent which was still not absolutely discovered. So the map of Africa was incomplete. And Conrad was voyaging there, and he not only talked about the illegal uh, trades concerning ivory and slaves, he also talked about the general African condition under the imperialism, under the colonialism. And therefore, it is a very brilliant story. And till the 1960s, Heart of Darkness was held in great repute, in great reputation, until the great writer of a famous novel called Things Fall Apart took apart Conrad's Heart of Darkness, saying that Conrad was racist and imperialist because of two reasons. Number one is that he portrays Africa as the heart of darkness. Number two is that he shows that Conrad never gave women the voice that they should receive. But I have my own opinions about the text, and I am a bit pro Conrad, you might say. I never say that Conrad was not an imperialist and that Achebe was wrong. Achebe was right in pointing it out, but we must put the text in context. That is, Conrad was as imperialist as the people of his times. That is, he was a product of his times, and therefore imperialism is a part of his discourse as well. But I do not find that he was an apologist for imperialism. That is, he did not properly support imperialism. My logic is that uh, Conrad actually shows how imperialism was in his times rather than writing an apology for it, writing a supportive statement for it. And instead of showing that Africa is the heart of darkness, he rather, in my opinion, goes on to show that how the West is the land of darkness, and London and England, how they become the heart of darkness in this text. I can give you my arguments when and if we study this text together. Then come the question of women. Now, in a colonized situation where the men have lost their voices, it is very natural that women would not have voices. That's the natural thing, because colonization happens twice with women. Number one, by the colonizer, who is a foreigner, and number two, by the patriarch. So, therefore, the woman is doubly silenced in a colonial situation. But this is a very difficult thing to talk about with uh, first semester students, so I'm not talking about it further. Now, this text, Heart of Darkness, it talks about an ambience of evil. And the next A collection which came out in 1904 was called Nostromo. Nostromo, a tale of the seaboard. This came out in 1904, as I have already mentioned. Now, uh, this is a very interesting tale as well. Nostromo is about Central America. So, look, almost the entire world is being portrayed by Conrad. It talks about Central America. In 1907, Conrad shifted his focus a bit and wrote a detective story called The Secret Agent. This one also has a subtitle, and the subtitle is A Simple Tale. And a set of six came in 1908. This is not very important. Now, in 1914, the year that the World War One started, Conrad wrote a collection of short stories which was very important, Twixt Sea, sorry, Twixt Land and Sea. This is betwixt, which means between. Twixt Land and Sea. This came out in 1914. It's a very important collection of short stories because, oh, there is a subtitle. Again, Tales. Uh, a very beautiful short story. Uh, and some of the short stories of collection have been there earlier in the syllabus. Uh, some of the short stories I would suggest you to read when you have time. One of them is definitely this one, An Outcast of the Islands. Then there is a novella called The Secret Sharer. Also, there's another short story called The Lagoon. I think you should read these three at least. At least. These are very brilliant short stories. Uh, then in 1917 came out his other uh, collection called The Shadow Line. And here he talks about, there is a subtitle once again, A Confession. Here he talks about several supernatural elements, which is very significant. Uh, in 1912, earlier, he wrote a personal record which has certain autobiographical elements. And in 1921, once again, this autobiographical element returned in notes on life and letters. These two have very strong autobiographical elements. Now, uh, in the next, then I'll mention some other stories which are not that important, which are some stray stories which he wrote in between. Like in 1901, he wrote The Inheritors. An extravagant story, not that important. And in 1903, he collaborated with another modernist uh, whose name is Ford Maddox Ford, in writing a novel called Romance, a Novel. Here he collaborated with a famous modernist whose name is Ford Maddox Ford. Okay. And this narrator, Marlowe, once again, he comes back in another writing of Conrad, which was Chance, a tale in two parts. Now, I have forgotten the year. Please check it up on the internet. Here, once again, we have the narrator as Marlowe. Now, what is so very interesting about Conrad is the features. Let me talk a little bit about his features. Okay. Now, the first feature that we notice in Conrad is his use of his choice of setting. And we see that Conrad, since he was a seafarer, he spent most of his life in seas, and therefore he has very uh, exotic locations for his novels, and very tropical settings, and his own experiences of the sea and of Malaysia, that is Malaya particularly, were useful to him. Like, look, he used Malaya, he used the Gulf Stream, uh, he used places like Bombay. Back then, it was not called Mumbai. It was called Bombay. He used America. He used Africa, etc. So he used several beautiful locations for his texts. And the beauty is that the setting is created with an atmosphere. He paints a beautiful picture of the atmosphere through his words, which is very interesting. Now, number two important thing, the second important thing is his use of character and also his narrative technique. Now, here I want to address this issue, how the novels became polyvocal. Now, you see, with Conrad, the English novel became truly global, or truly European, let's say. Not global, truly European. Why? Because Conrad was influenced by the French symbolist movement on the one hand. On the other hand, he was influenced by the Russian writer Ivan Turgenev to a great deal. And several other influences have come in the course of his career. And these influences have created a truly European version of literature in English after Hardy. And therefore, his narrative technique is very brilliant because he uses two kind of narrative techniques. So there are two narrative techniques. One is the direct narrative technique, and the other is a more obscure one. That is an indirect one. Okay. The obscure, not obscure properly, it's very oblique. He uses several methods, and Albert calls him a very conscious artist. And he has a very original style. He uses the English intonations to create a very lulling uh, embellishment in his language. And his characterization is very, very bold. And he uses several kinds of characterization, like when he is picturing the uh, natives of Africa in Heart of Darkness, his characterization is of one type. And when he's painting his non-heroes, like say Kurtz or Kurtz, whatever you call him in Heart of Darkness, he has a very different idea of creating a character. And he was a very interesting uh, painter of motives and of social pictures. And with, in general, character and narrative technique comes the third thing, which is his philosophy of life. Now, Conrad, it has often been pointed out that Conrad was nihilistic. That is, he did not believe in any existence, he did not believe in any order, he was chaotic. But not that. He believed that the universe is nonchalant. So it is neither benevolent nor malevolent. It is just nonchalant. It does not care. So he compares the universe with a large sewing machine, which is sewing time and space. Now, you might think that if you change the fuel, the universe will function differently. You might think that if you, say, tweak one um, mechanism, it will change, but it does not. It literally does not care about human life, it does not care about human suffering. And therefore, the picture of evil has been very brilliantly portrayed uh, in his writings, because he believes that man creates codes of conduct, man creates protocol, because he has to have a sort of strength from his self knowledge. That is, man desperately tries to create order among the disorder of the universe, uh, because otherwise there is no order in the universe, and therefore the universe, it is neither optimistic, it is neither pessimistic, it is just nonchalant to the pleas of man. And therefore many people have called him pessimistic, but I personally feel that his concept of life is a bit tragic rather than pessimistic. So this is what I had to say about Joseph Conrad. Now we come to our second author, who is Virginia Woolf. Now, Woolf is a very interesting character. Uh, she was born in London. Her father was Sir Leslie Stephen, a foremost intellectual of his times. And she lost her mother when she was 13, and she lost her father when she was 22. She temporarily lost her mental balance on both occasions, and she started writing for the Times Literary Supplement. in from 1905, and this association continued throughout her life. And she became a member of the famous Bloomsbury Group, which featured people like James Joyce, Leighton Strachey, Clive Bell, Leonard Woolf, and other people. And she married Leonard Woolf in 1912. And after her marriage, she became associated with a famous press, printing press called Hogarth Press. And this was a very prestigious press at her times. And throughout her life, she became a victim of immense stress. And finally, she committed suicide. So her dates are 1882 to 1941, when she cut her life short via committing suicide. Now, let me briefly talk about her works. In 1915, in the year 1915, came the first novel of Virginia Woolf called The Voyage Out. Okay. And this was more or less in the conventional orthodox narrative technique of the times. In 1919 came out her second novel, which is Night and Day. This was also written by the same tropes of plot and probing into the psyche of her characters, etc., etc. Then came out her third novel, which is Jacob's Room. This changed the history of fiction forever, because Jacob's character over here emerges through the thought processes and impressions of various people. And here she makes the successful use of something which we called the stream of consciousness technique. I'll go into the stream of consciousness technique, but first let me uh, quickly. Uh, okay, no, let's first go into the stream of consciousness technique. What is it? How is it used? Etc. 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 So, the stream of consciousness, I'm writing in short form. The stream of consciousness was a product of the 20th century developments in the fields of psychology, primarily employed by Sigmund Freud, who was a great influence on Joseph Conrad as well. But Sigmund Freud's ideas gave they paved the path for the stream of consciousness. But stream of consciousness was not absolutely new. Like in the novels of Samuel Richardson, in Lawrence Stern's Tristram Shandy, in Jane Austen's Emma, in Henry James, in George Eliot's novels, we see that there was a considerable analysis of character and the character's psychology. But the first novelist who consciously applied the stream of consciousness in the 20th century was Dorothy Richardson in a book called Pointed Roofs. This was one of her novels. Pointed Roofs is actually the first of the 12 volumes which were later titled as Pilgrimage. Okay, but the novels which actually took this to, the stream of consciousness to its pinnacle, where novels like Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dolloway, To the Lighthouse and the Waves, and definitely James Joyce's The Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, Finnegan's Wake, and Ulysses. Definitely. Now, in this kind of novel, there is an attempt to present the workings of the human mind and also to present through words the chain or train of thoughts that is passing through a person's mind. And these ideas were primarily developed from Sigmund Freud, from Adler, from Jung. This is not Jung, okay, this is Jung, Carl Gustav Jung. And basically, what happened was that the 20th century novelists were focusing on developing a human mind more than developing a plot. And William James, in his book Principles of Psychology, in this book, William James says, and I'm quoting him, consciousness does not appear to itself chopped up in bits. It is nothing jointed, it flows. Let us call it the stream of thought, of consciousness, or of subjective life. Consciousness does not appear to itself chopped up in bits. It is nothing jointed, it flows. Let us call it the stream of thought, of consciousness, or of subjective life. Now, so this is what William James says. So therefore, a train or a chain of thoughts is not the apt description for it. Rather, it should be a stream of consciousness. It's like a flowing river. It's incessantly changing, yet uh, maintaining a continuity. And the phrase was adopted by May Sinclair in 1918 while reviewing Dorothy Richardson's novels. And Virginia Woolf, when she was talking about this concept, she talked about her own theory of novels in an essay titled Modern Fiction. In two of her essays, she spoke about her ideas of the novel in modern fiction, and Mr. Arnold, Mr. Arnold, Mrs. Bennett, or Mrs. Bennett and Mr. Arnold. Uh, I think this is the title. Please check it up once. Okay, Mr. Arnold, Mrs. Bennett, or Mrs. Bennett, Mr. Arnold. Now, in this essay, she says very beautifully, life is not a series of gig lamps symmetrically arranged. Life is a luminous halo, a semi transparent envelope surrounding us from the beginning of consciousness to the end. And therefore, what happens is that she's saying that imagine, imagine there is a torchlight. It is emitting light like this. And say you are standing in front of it. Then what happens is that light comes from this side only. But does life come from one side only? It surrounds us from every aspect. So it's like a halo, it's like a luminous halo, it's like a ring of light surrounding us rather than one single source. And therefore, we cannot look at it from black and white. And what happens is that, therefore, in the stream of consciousness, uh, the techniques that are used, the events of the mind are much more important than external events. So now what happens is that Earlier, what happened was that you constructed a world and you placed a character in it, and the character had to negotiate his or her space with the world. But now, first you construct a character, and the way the character perceives the world, that is the world itself. I mean, uh, okay, let me explain it like this. Let me explain it like this. Say, I am on my way to the college. Okay. And on my way, say, I am sitting at the left side of the bus. And I am watching all the buildings, all the trees, everything on the left side. So my perception of the world is based on that left side only. The right side also exists, but since I haven't seen it, it does not alter my worldview of the world. All right. So the stream of consciousness created this perception based reality rather than a given reality with which we have to come to terms. So now the reality that is given is the one in which we have already come to terms with the given world. All right. So that is the beauty of the stream of consciousness novel. All right. Now let's come back to our discussion on Virginia Woolf. Let me once again share the screen and I'll begin. And we are sharing once again. Okay. So now let's get back to Virginia Woolf and her novels. Uh, One second, please. Now, uh, as I was saying, that Virginia Woolf's third novel, Jacob's Room, changed the ideas about novels as we perceive them right now. Now, in Mrs. Dolloway, her next novel, in this novel, she uses the same technique with conspicuous success. And this novel is based on the experience of one day, of a single day. So, this novel actually portrays what goes on in a mind, on a single simple mind, on a single simple day. And by this method, she uses internal monologue, that is, a character talking to himself or herself, the way we talk to ourselves in our own head. And she creates the London experience by the interior monologue or internal monologue. Sorry, this is more properly interior monologue and not internal monologue. So, by the technique of the interior monologue, Mrs. Dalloway, Virginia Woolf creates the London picture. And in her next novel, To the Lighthouse, she continues the same idea and the same technique. And here she talks about the Ramsay family. They are not in any way related to Gordon Ramsay, which I could find out. So the Ramsay family, and they are studied with very characteristic incisiveness. Now, Mrs. Dalloway and Mrs. Ramsay, they are concerned about the everyday happenings. But as Woolf says in the modern fiction, that her aim is to examine an ordinary mind on an ordinary day. Now, Mrs. Dalloway is the tale of one day, and To the Lighthouse is a tale of one family with three parts, 10 years apart. So the parts are 10 years apart. In the first part, the family plans to go to the lighthouse. In the second part, they go to the lighthouse. In between, there are 10 years of gap. Now, one of the greatest works that Virginia Woolf has ever written is called The Waves. This is often considered as a prose poem. It is highly symbolic, with almost no plot, but merely a study of the consciousness of the characters. And this is something which, in this essay, she talks about, like Anton Chekhov, one of the greatest story writers of all time. He wrote a short story called Gusev. Now, this story almost has no storyline, but what happens in the mind of Gusev is very important. So, some soldiers are returning, and what happens is that one of them falls ill and dies, and they are at sea, and his body is thrown out of the ship like a carrot or a radish. A little while later, Gusev also falls ill and dies, and his body is also thrown out to the sea like a carrot or a radish. So actually, almost there is no plot. So plot became very subsidiary to character and perception. Okay, so character and perception became the primary issues over here. Now, what happens is that next she wrote uh, a biography, a fictitious biography called Orlando Biography. If you can hear some background noises, I am extremely sorry. There is a carnival going on in my locality, and I can't just turn out the volume of that. So it came out in 1928. It is a completely fictitious biography with very brilliant recreation of historical periods. And it is one of the very beautiful biographies ever written in English language. Then we have Flush. It came out in 1933. Flush is a biography of a dog. And what happened is that Woolf experimented, consciously experimented with several styles, and in her non-fiction as well, she used several of her techniques. I'm not going into her non-fictions, although I could have gone into A Room of One's Own, but I am not going into that because it is more of a feminist manifesto written by Woolf. Also, The Three Guineas, which is a sequel to this A Room of One's Own. Now, I have already talked about Woolf's technique and style and characterization. So, I am not repeating all of that once again. I'll just straight away go into James Joyce and I'll conclude this lecture because I do not want it to be very long and very tedious. James Joyce's dates are almost the same as Woolf, 1882 to 1941. He was not an Englishman but an Irishman born in Dublin, Ireland. He studied in the Jesuit College and Royal University, but he did not take the orders. He studied medicine in France, but during World War One, he was in Switzerland, and later he returned to France, where he suffered continuously from poor health, and he had multiple eye surgeries. Now, the first collection of Joyce's short stories, called The Dubliners, was published in 1914, and it is a brilliant collection. I mean, it is perhaps the greatest collection of short stories in the English language from this period because it, on the one hand, it delineates the sordid the slum life of Dublin, but this collection, starting from very orthodox narrative techniques, it creates several nuances which are very interesting, and especially like the sisters, the dead, Araby. These are stories which you will remember. Like Araby is a story about a young boy and his first love. And this is a very beautiful story. All the stories are very beautiful from here, and I think you should read this text. Next came out his novel, the first novel, a portrait of the artist as a young man. This came out in 1916, and this is very, very autobiographical. This is highly autobiographical concerning a central character called Stephen Dedalus. And if you read Araby, the story that I mentioned from Dubliners, you'll see that the boy from Araby and Stephen Dedalus, they have so much in common. And Dedalus is often identified with Joyce himself. And here he also follows the thoughts and impressions of a child and an artist. A portrait of the artist is by and large a Künstlerroman novel. Künstlerroman is the German term for the growth of an artist from a child. How Stephen grows up from his Catholic uh, background. And if you read the novel, at every turn of Stephen's life, the narrative technique changes. Like the novel begins like a children's story, it ends with a very sordid note where Stephen is escaping Dublin because he is uh, too troubled by the life that Dublin has to offer to him, and he wants to become an artist. So he has to escape by any means possible. The third novel, which is very significant, is Ulysses. It came out in 1922, so this is the 100th year of Ulysses. It is also set in the slums of Dublin. Stephen Dedalus, now an artist, finally decides to return to Dublin, and it covers basically 18 hours of 16th June, which is also called the Bloomsday, the Bloomsbury Day or the Bloomsday. And here we see that Stephen Dedalus has returned to Ireland, to Dublin, and he is seeking a father figure which he never had. And he is meeting an old man, a middle aged man called Leopold Bloom at a pub. Leopold has escaped his house because his wife, Molly Bloom, is having an affair with the landlord, and Leopold has escaped the house and he has come to a pub. Now, in Stephen, Leopold finds a child, that the son that he never had. In Leopold, Stephen finds the father that he never had. And the entire novel is based on Homer's The Odyssey. There are several chapters which are based on the Homer's The Odyssey, and it's a brilliant novel. Joyce took 21 years to write this novel, and it's a beautiful novel written in stream of consciousness method, and it has many parallels with Odyssey. Now, Leopold Bloom is Ulysses or Odysseus, and Stephen Dedalus becomes Ulysses' son, Telemachus. Sorry, Telemachus. And Molly Bloom becomes Penelope, Ulysses' wife. And there are such many, many such beautiful uh, kind of analogies. And the text ends with Molly Bloom's long uh, internal monologue, which is almost 45 pages before she falls asleep, and there are no punctuations in those 45 pages. Now, after that, we have Joyce's. This is Joyce's masterpiece. After that, Joyce wrote a book which is a terrible book, Finnegan's Wake. Finnegan's Wake traces the human history from the beginning in a rather very disjointed manner through the dreams of a certain Mr. Earwicker. It is written in 29 languages, and almost the book almost becomes incomprehensible due to the limits to which it stretches the stream of consciousness. And you see, therefore, it's a very unchecked, uninhibited, and a brilliant novel. But honestly speaking, I never understood this. After this, Joyce decided that he wanted to show that he could make sense as well. And then he wrote a book of poetry called Chamber Music. This is very unimportant, but this is a collection of beautiful lyrics. And so that's it for James Joyce. And with this, we end our session on modern novelists. So thank you so much. If you have any questions, put them in the comment section. Thank you so much. Have a great day.